Digital marketing offers Digital marketing offers an amazing opportunity for new businesses with limited budgets to not only kind of test their model and establish whether or not the sort of basic assumptions of their business model are correct, are accurate, but ultimately to generate enormous exposure if they get things right at relatively minimal expense. So I just want to run through a few examples, a few different ways in which digital really levels the playing field in that respect. The first is the search engines. So whilst of course it's true to say that Google does favour large established brands, Google also tends to prioritise those brands, no matter how small they might be, that have a real focus on a particular niche. Because ultimately Google knows that niche brands that have real expertise in a particular vertical, Google knows that there is something to be said for that, there is value in that. So for example, if you happen to be competing with John Lewis for a particular sort of narrow product range, of course Google would favour John Lewis enormously in terms of its brand signals, its trust signals, but the very fact that your domain, your website was so narrowly geared towards this specific product range would also really work in your favour, and to some extent may enable you to actually achieve rankings that some much larger brands would struggle to, as Google would see that such a large proportion of your domain was highly relevant. The next thing I want to talk about is social media. So social media too also can offer new brands with limited budgets an amazing opportunity to really compete with big organisations. You don't need huge budgets in order to be able to achieve quite significant traction on all social channels, but particularly on Facebook. It all comes down to understanding your numbers. So if you can take a small budget, it might be £100, could be £1,000, a small budget, test your particular niche, as long as you're able to track all of your numbers and you have a fair sense of the lifetime customer value in terms of profit, then you can start to arrive at some really meaningful conclusions and ultimately develop a profitable and scalable business model. You don't need huge budgets. So really worth, and that's what we call a cost per acquisition model, a CPA model, but it all comes down to knowing your numbers. The third thing I want to touch upon is email. So email marketing is arguably your most important channel, particularly in the early stages where you're trying to build a really strong relationship with the core kind of nucleus of your target audience. You're trying to get as much feedback from them as possible so you can iterate and evolve your model in the most intelligent way. So not only is it crucial for that customer feedback loop, but it also as well will largely determine your customer lifetime value, because the more you can engage with these people via email, the longer they'll stay with you, the more they'll buy from you, which means the more they're worth, and therefore the more you can invest in acquiring them in the first place. So huge implications for your customer lifetime value. They also as well can help you to promote your content. In fact, many brands, both big and small, will find that their email list will have greater implications for their reach on social media than their advertising on social media directly will itself, which is kind of really paradoxical to think about. But ultimately this core nucleus of your audience are so engaged, they're the people that are most likely to share content on your behalf. So very often you'll find that's where most of your social reach will come from, not directly from you promoting your content on social media itself. The final thing I want to mention is influencer marketing, which of course, as you're probably aware, is a case of identifying those people within your particular target audience who wield significant influence and building relationships with them and seeing how you can sort of leverage their position within that community. Now, this achieves a number of things, and it does so in an incredibly efficient manner. The first thing is that these relationships, they reinforce the position of your brand. Secondly, it results in incredibly high quality content, because ultimately this is the top 1% of that particular world. So who better to capture content and insight and video material or whatever else it might be than from directly that 1%. Thirdly, it increases your reach on social media, because the audience they have is of course the audience that you want to get in front of. And finally, it can even result in you being able to solicit links back from their websites and blogs to build the authority from an SEO perspective of your website, of your domain. So they're just a few ways in which influencer marketing can help but above all, it's cheap, it's really cost effective. As long as these influencers buy into your brand, as long as they really believe in the difference that you're trying to make, very often they'll do it for not much incentive at all, maybe just for the free use of your product or service. So it all comes down to the kind of brand ethos and the quality of your product, but it can be incredibly economical. So there are just a few examples. Ultimately, I'd say the most important thing is you really building a brand that you believe in and being so crystal clear on your numbers so that you can afford to invest in these different channels and really understand whether or not they are proving to be viable, profitable channels or not.